Hi guys, welcome back to Killer Content. And this week we are going to be discussing David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. So I want to start out with his childhood because this is a killer whose childhood has such a significant role in it. I mean, every killer does. Their childhood affects them a lot. But, like, this man's childhood was rough from the get-go. It was rough from the moment he was born. So, his mother was married to a man named Tony Falco, and she was head over heels in love with him. And I mean, stupid. You know that kind of love that's just so blind that you think about it, like, so long afterwards and everything else? Well, that was this kind of love. And he cheated on her and left her. And not long after, she remarried to a man, and his name was Joseph Kleinman. Sorry, I had to check his name. So when she married Joseph, it took about 3 years, and she finally got pregnant, and she gave birth to David Berkowitz. But fun fact, when he was born, his name was not David Berkowitz. His name was Richard David Falco. That's right, y'all. She named him after her first husband. Even though it was her second husband's kid. So he was so mad. And this is an alleged thing, but I'm pretty sure this is what happened. He was pissed off because, what man wants their wife naming their child after their first husband, who was a piece of garbage? So he said that she can either rename the baby or get rid of him, or he was leaving, So she gave him up for adoption. And then he was eventually taken in by a Jewish American family called the Berkowitz. And that's when he got the name David Berkowitz. So, at about 14 years old, his adoptive mother passed away from breast cancer. And life at home just did not get any better at all. And so he had started, getting rid of school. He had an above average IQ, but he just quit with school and didn't make any effort in it, and he ended up committing petty larceny and starting a bunch of fires. But and he was considered a bully. All of the neighbors and everything said that he was known to be a bully. And there's no legal action that was ever taken against him or anything, nothing. So at 17, he ended up enlisting in I believe it was the Navy. It was the Army. I lied. But so he enlisted in the Army, and he served in South Korea, and he served in the U.S. And about 3 years later, he got honorably discharged. I'm not quite sure what for, but you should be able to find it on the internet somewhere. So he got honorably discharged and came back to America. Well, when he came back to America, he searched for and found his birth mother, Betsy. And after meeting a few times and everything else and talking, she ended up telling him about his birth and why she gave him up for adoption and all this other stuff. So that really hit him. This was the crisis moment for his life. So Berkowitz eventually moved to an apartment in Yonkers, and in Christmas Eve of 1975, Christmas Eve of 1975, he had stabbed 2 women on Christmas Eve. So he didn't start out as the .44 caliber killer. He started out with a knife, and he stabbed the 2 victims One of the names of the victims is not listed, like it was never released, but the other victim was identified and her name was released, and she had survived the attack. And at this point, I think he didn't like the way it felt when stabbing someone, or he wanted like a more, I don't know, I guess a more like out there kind of like, you know, when you stab someone, you can just walk up and go whoop, you know? I think he wanted something like bam, you know? Just boom, boom. And sorry, I'm so weird. So he wanted something like that, or like it just didn't give him that like satisfaction, you know? And so, or he just didn't think it was successful. Like it obviously was not successful. So he's like, you know what? Fuck it, I'm gonna shoot people. So then we move on to the shootings. Most of his victims were women. And I think that's mostly influenced because of his mom. Sorry, my dog has to be in my lap sometimes. And most of it is influenced because of his mother and the way she acted and everything else. And I truly think that's where a lot of his rage came from. Like I said, that was the crisis point in his life, is when he found out why his mom gave him up and what she did. So he then began shooting. A lot of them were girls. Some of them were girls sitting on a porch, which there were 2 girls he did sit on a porch and he killed them. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. They just got back from a late night movie and they were just sitting on the porch, and he approached in a military outfit, like asking for directions. And in the middle of him asking for directions, he just pulled out a gun, shot both of them. They fell to the ground, and he shot like 4 to 6 more times, and or something like that, several times. And one of the girls survived, and the other was considered a paraplegic afterwards, which is really sad. And they just kept escalating and escalating. Like, one of his beginning killings was that it was a girl and a guy in a car together. They were just sitting together. They had finished like watching a movie, and they were just sitting in their car talking, and he came up, and the girl was driving, and the male was in the passenger seat. And I remember the male's name was Carl, and he came up and shot on the passenger side and shot at Carl, and he hit him 2 times, and I believe Carl passed away, and the girl only had minor. No, he did not pass away. He got shot in the skull, and they had to put a metal plate to replace the section of his skull that had gotten shot. And she only had like minor injuries from the glass shattering, because after the shot started firing, she automatically drove away, went straight to a hospital. And then there was, later on it started to become more couples, but they thought that he had mistaken Carl for a female because he had long hair. So because a lot of the times, like I said, a group of like 2 girls sitting in a car or just sitting on a porch chatting and stuff. So time goes on, and I think it was 77 that there was a press release. They started to connect all of the shootings because it was all committed with a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver. And yes, it was March 10th of 1977. And because of that, and they found that connection, they were like, this is interesting. So there was a press conference. A lot of the documents on the murders were released, and people started getting scared. And after that, he continued to kill, but then he got kind of cocky. And there was his next shooting after the press release was Alexander and Valentina. They were both shot twice, and both of them died. The Alexander died like 2 hours later after getting to the hospital, and then it was the girl Valentina who passed away on the scene. And at the crime scene, there was a letter left for the captain. It was addressed specifically to him, and he eventually wrote another letter to Jimmy Breslin, who was a columnist. So you can read about the letter. I have a copy of like what was said in the letter to the captain. I have that on my website, killercontent.tv, and it's in the article. There's literally a whole section with that. So feel free to go look at that. I also have more information than what's in this video as well. But to continue, the next shooting after that was Sal Lupo and Judy Placido, and they both had survived their attack. And then the last one was Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante, and this one sucked. So they were like making out, and he came up to the passenger side of the car. He was about like 3 feet away from the car, and he shot 4 rounds into the car while they were making out. And that was at like 3 o'clock in the morning too. And so when he did, the male lost his eyeball. He lost one of his eyeballs because of it, and the girl died instantly, Stacy. And his capture, this is the night that his capture really started, because there was a lady who was out walking her dog, and she was like walking home or something like that, and she saw like a police leave a ticket on like this yellow Ford Galaxy. And then she said that there was a few moments later, she saw a man approach the vehicle, and he was holding a dark object in his hands. And then after he had gotten the dark object, a few minutes later, she heard gunshots like not far from where they were at. And I mean, of course, she's out of harm's way. She's not there. I mean, a lot of his killings were in like victims that were in cars. Most of them were. But he had been, he went home to his apartment in Yonkers, and the lady told the police about it, and they searched, and they found the Ford Galaxy that was ticketed that night. They found a copy of the ticket, and they found out that it was registered to David. So then they found his apartment building, and they went to his car, and when they went to his car, they saw a rifle in the back seat. And you know, it's legal to own a hunting rifle. Like, it's fine. It's perfectly legal in New York at the time. But the fact that he's a murder suspect, like, that's when it really, like, gets you, you know? So they searched the car, and they found a duffel bag, and the duffel bag was full of ammunition, and it had maps of each of the crime scenes in there as well. So, you know, absolutely crazy. At this point, they didn't want to risk having a confrontation with him in the hallway of his apartment. So they sent someone to go get a search warrant for the apartment from the judge. And when they did, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and Berkowitz finally left his apartment and got in his car. Well, they didn't have the search warrant for the apartment yet, but there was 2 officers that there was a sergeant and a detective. They approached him. One went on the driver's side and held their gun up to his temple, and the other was pointing their gun at him from the passenger side. And he looks at the dude who was on the driver's side and said, "Well, you got me." And that was that. And then he's like, who did I get, you know? And he said, oh, he's like, you know, he's like, no, I don't. Why don't you tell me? And he's like, Sam, David Berkowitz. Like, what? Because he's addressed himself as the son of Sam in all of his stuff. Well, time goes on, and he, in his, like, confession, he tried to say that, like, he had an old neighbor named Sam Carr, and who was the Sam, and his dog, which was a black Labrador, was possessed by an ancient demon who was demanding blood and like this and that and all this other stuff. And then he was in trial and like continued yelling, Stacy was a whore, I'd kill her again, I'd kill them all again. And it was just absolutely, like, I mean bonkers, y'all. Bonkers. This man was fucked up in the head. And when they finally got the search warrant too for his apartment, they like went in there and they had satanic graffiti all over the walls. They found diaries that he had kept since he was like 21, because apparently he needs to write in diaries like a 14-year-old girl. But I mean, who knows? Psychopaths gotta write their emotions out too, I guess. But like during the trial, after yelling all that stuff about Stacy, he was deemed incompetent, and the court ordered a psych eval on him. And then he was in a cell being detained for a long time, and then he drew a picture like on the bottom of the wall of a man in a jail cell, and it said, I'm not okay. And I'm not okay, I'm not well. And he was finally deemed competent enough for trial, and for each murder charge, he was facing 25 to life for each of them to be served consecutively. And he finally, you know, he was charged and this and that, and later on, he tried to say that, like, he said that, like, the possession was all just a hoax and, like, this and that, and, like, he had been contemplating murder for a long time so that he could get revenge on the world that turned its back on him. And it's, like, which, that statement alone, because that was because he stated that to his, like prison-issued psychiatrist or whatever, and he stated that to them because, and it's like, that just shows even more that, like, his mom telling him about his birth and, like, him being given away, that was, like, the major crisis point for him, because that is what really triggered, I mean, like, obviously he was already fucked up, but that is what triggered him to, like, want to kill people, because his own mother, like, turned his back on him just because, like, she had this like immense obsession with her first husband and everything, but she didn't want to lose her second husband. And it's like, well, if you didn't want to lose your fucking second husband, why'd you name your kid after your first one? Like, dumbass. Sorry. But so that was definitely the turning point in his life. He is a total psychopath. And I mean, like I said, he mapped out, like, he was organized as fuck. He mapped out where he was gonna kill. He picked his targets ahead of time and everything else, made sure they were in cars or whatever. I mean, there was this one girl that was walking home from campus and she had her textbooks in her hand and he was gonna shoot her. And, like, he was, like, right in front of her face. Like, he just whipped out a fucking gun. And, like, her trying to defend herself, she held her textbooks up in front of her face, but, like, they did nothing because the bullet, it's a .44 caliber. So the bullet whipped through the books and hit her in the head, and she died. And it was really, really fucking tragic. It was honestly, all of it was really, really tragic. Sorry, my dog just in my face. So if you guys liked this, let me know. If you have a serial killer you want me to talk about or want to know more about, let me know and I will look them up and give you as much information as possible on them and make sure you have a cool article. Thanks, guys. Stay killer.